The year is 1177. A 16-year-old king sits in the fortress city of Ashkelon, watching smoke rise from burning villages across the horizon. His hands are wrapped in bandages, his face hidden behind cloth. He is Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, and he is dying. Leprosy is consuming his body nerve by nerve, sensation by sensation. Outside the walls, the greatest military commander of the age leads 26,000 soldiers toward Jerusalem. Baldwin has 500 knights. By every calculation of medieval warfare, the kingdom of Jerusalem should fall within weeks. But this dying boy is about to orchestrate the most improbable military victory of the Crusades, a battle so impossible that historians still struggle to explain how it happened. To understand the Battle of Montgisard, we must first understand the impossible circumstances that led to it. Baldwin IV was diagnosed with leprosy at age 9. His tutor, William of Tyre, noticed the boy felt no pain when other children dug their nails into his arm during play. In the 12th century, leprosy was not merely a disease but a divine curse, a sentence to social death. Sufferers were typically expelled from communities, forced to announce their presence with bells. But Baldwin was heir to the throne of Jerusalem. He could not be cast out, so he ruled while his body slowly deteriorated. By 16, Baldwin had lost sensation in his hands and feet. The disease attacks peripheral nerves, leaving victims unable to feel injuries. This leads to repeated trauma, infection, and progressive disfigurement. Medieval physicians had no understanding of bacterial infection. They could only watch as the king's extremities began to wither. Yet Baldwin governed with remarkable competence, navigating the treacherous politics of the Crusader states while managing constant physical agony. The strategic situation in 1177 was equally dire. For decades, the 4 Crusader kingdoms along the Levanten coast had survived because the Muslim powers around them remained divided. Damascus fought Cairo, Aleppo fought Mosul, but that fragmentation had ended. Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known to the West as Saladin, had united Egypt and Syria. The noose around Jerusalem had tightened. Saladin commanded the wealth of the Nile Delta and the military resources of Damascus. He was 40 years old, experienced, healthy, and driven by a mission to reclaim Jerusalem for Islam. In autumn 1177, Saladin received intelligence that fundamentally shaped his strategy. The bulk of the Crusader army had marched north into Syria, pursuing what they believed was Saladin's main thrust. Jerusalem's defenses were critically weakened. Saladin mobilized his full Egyptian army, 26,000 men including elite Mamluk cavalry, light horse archers, and Sudanese infantry. This was not a raid, but an invasion designed to eliminate the kingdom of Jerusalem permanently. As this massive force crossed into Crusader territory, panic spread through the land, villages burned. Refugees flooded the roads. Baldwin was resting in Ashkelon when the news arrived. His advisors urged retreat. The numbers were catastrophic. 500 knights against 26,000 soldiers represented odds of 50 to 1. Medieval military doctrine held that attacking forces needed at least 3 to 1 superiority. Baldwin's situation was tactically hopeless. But the young king possessed something that could not be measured on ledgers or maps. He understood that if he remained trapped in Ashkelon, Saladin would bypass the fortress and march directly to Jerusalem. The holy city would fall while its king watched from behind stone walls. For Baldwin, this was unacceptable. His body was dying, but his duty remained absolute. He ordered a breakout. The force Baldwin assembled represented everything available. 80 Knights Templar under Grand Master Odo de St. Amand formed the corps. These were warrior monks who had taken vows never to retreat unless outnumbered 3 to 1. They were already outnumbered 50 to 1. Secular knights from the royal household joined them, along with sergeants and infantry. The total force numbered approximately 500 mounted knights, with perhaps a few thousand supporting infantry. On the morning of November 25th, Baldwin ordered the gates of Ashkelon open. The small Muslim blocking force Saladin had left to contain the city was caught unprepared. The Crusaders smashed through the cordon and rode north along the coastal road. They were now alone in hostile territory, pursuing an army that outnumbered them catastrophically. But they carried something that transformed their desperate gamble into a holy crusade. The true cross, the relic believed to be the actual timber of Christ's crucifixion. For medieval knights, this was not merely a symbol, but the physical presence of divine power. Saladin's confidence bordered on arrogance. He knew Baldwin was at Ashkelon with a tiny force. The strategic calculus was simple: keep the leper king contained and march on Jerusalem. Saladin left only a screening force at Ashkelon and turned his massive army north. His soldiers began to disperse across the countryside, foraging and looting. Discipline weakened. Many troops removed their armor in the afternoon heat. The tight formation of a marching army dissolved into scattered groups spread across miles of Palestinian countryside. Baldwin pushed his small force at maximum speed, riding hard up the coastal road. The physical toll on the young king must have been extraordinary. Riding requires constant grip and balance. Baldwin had lost sensation in his hands and feet. Medieval sources suggest his attendants tied the reins to his wrists. Every mile represented agony that he could not fully feel, only the exhaustion of muscles compensating for dead nerves. Yet he maintained the pace, driving towards Saladin's dispersed army. The geography funneled both forces toward a confrontation near Montgisard, modern Tel al-Jazir. Saladin's army was crossing a seasonal riverbed, the Wadi al-Sarar, when Baldwin's scouts located them. The Crusaders approached from the south on November 25th, late afternoon. The wind blew from the north, carrying dust from Saladin's army toward the Crusaders. They could smell the enemy before seeing them. What Baldwin's scouts reported changed everything. Saladin's force was not in battle formation, but strung out across miles, crossing difficult terrain. Baggage trains blocked the roads. Soldiers had dismounted. Armor was packed away. The greatest army in the region was vulnerable. Baldwin faced an immediate tactical choice. A cautious commander would have withdrawn to fight another day. But Baldwin understood that hesitation meant Jerusalem would fall. He ordered his men to dismount and pray before the true cross. Medieval chronicles record that the king wept. Then he gave the order to charge. The physics of the Frankish cavalry charge explains why 500 could shatter 26,000. A 12th century knight on a warhorse represented concentrated kinetic energy. Horse, rider, and armor combined to exceed 1,000 pounds. They wielded 12-foot lances couched under the arm, concentrating all that momentum into a steel point. When deployed properly, heavy cavalry functioned as human missiles. The Crusaders struck the dispersed flank of Saladin's army at full gallop. The impact was devastating. The Muslim-like cavalry, caught dismounted and unarmored, were overwhelmed instantly. The Crusader wedge drove deep into the enemy formation, shattering cohesion. Panic spread faster than any commander could respond. Soldiers nearest the attack shouted warnings, but Saladin's army was stretched across miles. Orders could not propagate. The disciplined machine that had terrified the Levant dissolved into chaos. Baldwin rode with the Templars at the front. Medieval sources disagree on how a king without sensation in his hands could control a warhorse in combat. Most likely, he was guided by experienced squires or secured to his saddle. But his presence at the tip of the spear had immeasurable psychological impact. The knights were not fighting for an abstract crown, but for a boy bleeding beside them. Odo de St. Amand led his 80 Templars in tight formation, driving towards Saladin's personal guard. Saladin attempted to rally his Mamluks, his elite bodyguard. These were professional soldiers trained from childhood. They formed a defensive ring around the Sultan's position, but the momentum belonged entirely to the Crusaders. The geography compounded Saladin's problems. The baggage train that had made his march comfortable now became a death trap, blocking retreat routes. The river crossing became a bottleneck where panicked soldiers crushed each other. The fighting lasted into evening. The Mamluks held their ground desperately, buying time for Saladin to escape. When their line finally collapsed, the Sultan fled on a racing camel, abandoning his army. The organized withdrawal became a rout. Medieval chronicles suggest over 90% of Saladin's force was destroyed, killed in combat, or lost during the retreat across the Sinai Desert. Freezing rains fell during the withdrawal, turning the disaster into a catastrophe. Thousands died of exposure and thirst. Baldwin halted the pursuit at nightfall. His small force had achieved the impossible, but the king paid a terrible price. The exertion accelerated his disease. When his armor was removed, attendants found extensive internal bleeding. The young king had bought his kingdom time, but he had spent his own remaining vitality to do so. The victory at Montgisard sent shockwaves through the medieval world. In Europe, it seemed to confirm divine protection over Jerusalem. But the miracle could not be repeated. Saladin rebuilt his forces and returned, cautious now of underestimating the leper king. Baldwin continued to rule, even as blindness and paralysis consumed him. In 1183, unable to ride, he was carried into battle on a litter. His mere presence still deterred Saladin. Baldwin died in 1185 at age 24. 2 years later, the incompetent leadership that followed him led the Crusader army into disaster at the Battle of Hattin. Jerusalem fell to Saladin in October 1187. The miracle of Montgisard became a painful memory of what might have been. If only the boy who broke an empire had lived long enough to secure what he had won.